Good evening, everyone. Good evening. Every once in a while, Zoom comes up with another little anecdote. So I guess that's what tonight's was. So I wanted to just bring to us for discussion tonight a Zoom brief conference that I was on this morning. It's called One Poet, One Poem. And a poet is invited to present just one poem and then talk about the process that the poet takes and answer questions about the poem itself. And this, so I bring this up because I want to talk about how the process of this work can be translated into our practice and what we are doing in practice, that in some ways, some of these practices are not different. And so I found it very useful, and I found myself translating it into, how I see us and how we live and what it is we are doing. So the poet's name was Jeffrey Davis. He was born in Seattle, and he grew up in a few places around Washington, but mostly was raised in Tacoma. And he graduated from high school in Tacoma. And then he went on to Oregon State University and then went to Penn State, where he got a master's in English, an MFA in poetry, and a PhD in English. He's now in the faculty of the University of Arkansas, but he also is a faculty on the low residency program, the Rainier Writing Workshop, which is out of Pacific Lutheran University. So Professor Davis is a Black man, but I don't think what I know of his poetry, he doesn't appear to write in the Black idiom. It seems to me that his subject is very much his life, his struggles with his father, his difficulties with his father who became an addict after he had suffered a very difficult injury to his leg and had to leave the US Navy, and then struggles with his marriage and his son and his wife and all of the same kinds of things that we all deal with. So his main practice in the process of his writing is the question of revision. And we were considering this one poem called The Night Angler. He loves to fish, and so I guess he's fly fishing. And so this poem is about fishing and the catching of something on the other end and the transfer of whatever is going on in these actions. And so we think, oh, it's about the man and the fish, but it's about all of his life and the difficulties of his life around this. Cast out the line and something catches, and here, we have something happen in that interaction. It's a beautiful poem, but he showed us, I don't know, maybe 20 revisions that he scrolled through very quickly. And what he does is he prints out every revision. Every time he goes through and he makes a revision, he prints it out again so that he has this physical poem in front of him and not just something that he's imagining on, I'm certain he writes, I'm not certain, but I assume that he writes on computer, as we all do today. But this question of revision is a most interesting one, because I thought about revision is what we do with our lives, that we're all revising our lives continually, that we don't just have this life that has landed down wherever we are that we don't change anything, but we are continually revising. Now, if you are an artist of any kind, I don't care what it is, you will revise that work until you say, okay, that's done. I'm good with that. I've got that now. I can go on to the next thing. I can go to the next piece of art. And that revision goes on and on. And, for some artists, they will still want to revise, even though the sculpture is fixed and there's nothing they can do about it. They still might look very critically at what they have done and still want to revise it. But at some point, it's done. And I think that's true in our practice too. This man speaks about training. He speaks about what he does is an accumulation of hunches that he uses to express his work. And by the training that he received, these can be fairly advanced in expression and very rich in terms of what he puts down on a piece of paper. And so that training is a big one. And it's the question of his training in critical thinking that translates into creativity. And that's what he does, that he uses the process and the work of reading critically and then writing creatively. So I think if I translate that into our Zen practice, we may be on the cushion working very hard. Maybe something we are dealing with is very difficult, and we are thinking very critically about how to deal with this and about what we can do with such a thing. And when we get off the cushion, we must act creatively, because every act of life is an act of creativity. You think, oh, I'm not a creative person, but anytime you speak a language, that is creative. You don't think, I'm going to say 10 sentences, I'm going to think up the sentences, I'm going to revise them, and then I'll speak to you. It's not how it is. We speak them out, and that is a creative act of language, a creative moment of communication. So this, maybe this practice of creative reading, as he says, or reading critically, is also our polishing ourselves to be able to live the virtue that Dogen Zenji asks of us, that Zen practice asks of us, that our practice is forming in us in order to be the best we can among one another. So we do look at ourselves, or ought to look at ourselves critically, so that we don't miss the edges of ourselves that need refinement. We've all got them. We all need refinement. We all have edges that are asking to be smoothed over. That's what the function of Sangha is, to smooth out the hard edges of our own selves. So in this question of revision, Professor Davis also talks about how revision reveals to him what the poem is all about. When he starts a poem, he does not know exactly what it is that has sort of nudged him to begin to write something in the first place, or what nudges somebody to paint something particular, or what nudges one to form their garden in a particular way, any of that. But the revision begins to reveal the total expression that asks to come out of the depths of ourselves. If we have a garden, we might plant, put things down move them around and think about whether that's the right place to leave that. We have to consider so much. We have to think about the sun and the shade and the soil and all kinds of things that go into just a simple thing like a garden. And yet there's a great deal of critical revision that will allow the plant to be what it is about and what the plant can speak to us in a particular way as we live with what we have done. So once again, that question of revising our own lives or revising ourselves gets us deeper to understand what we ourselves are about what maybe is nudging in us. What hunch do we have about something in ourselves that we haven't been able to reach yet, that is just sort of pressing at us and we haven't been able to find an expression. And again, I mentioned that he prints it out and he has the physical poem in front of him. And this question of the physical nature of revision is ourselves in the world also in what we do. Perhaps we want to revise about ourselves, our response to things. And we feel that maybe we make presumptuous thoughts about somebody and we want to change that. The physical person before us is that physical being that we contend with, that reminds us what we are aiming toward in that revision. So that physical beingness is deeply important. I like also that he said that the poet is the curator of his revisions. And I loved that because we are the curator of our lives, my friends. We truly are. We are curating this being that we have that is this. And it is our work to bring it to the finest piece of art that it can be. So I really appreciated that, just that word curator. His work, his poems help him reckon with the existential problems in his life. And just as we are sitting and practicing and revising, we are all working with existential problems in our lives. It's not different. And then the question is, do we have some outlet that allows us to speak, to try and form that existential work so that we can see it clearly and we can deepen ourselves and know ourselves better in relationship to that. So he asks also in the question of his writing poems, how am I in the world? How am I in relationship to the existential questions? How am I in this question of practice that I have taken up? That is a deep expression of my own spiritual nature. Why are we doing anything? Why do we do what we do? What are we here for? So he speaks about the importance of how he is changed. He himself is changed, not just the poem, but he himself is changed in the process of revision. Because as we revise, we see deeper and deeper into the complexity, and we are able to unfold whatever it is, to open it so that we can see our own foolishness, our fallacies, our whatever, our hindrances. Another one important and a couple of other interesting things. He works very hard to be in the here and now in his writing. And he speaks about not being moved on. And I thought that that was an important thing. He spoke about we are in a society in which we're all moving on. Let's move on with things. Let's forget about yesterday and move on with tomorrow. And he says he works very hard not to be moved on, but to stay with whatever those questions are that allow some insight to unfold in that revision process. So in the revision process also, we try again. We try again. We try again. And this is our practice also. You know, we sit on the zafu in the morning, we sit in zazen, and we come away maybe a little bit purified, a little bit smoothed over in our practice. And then we go out into the day, and then, you know, we're all full of foolishness and mistakes and difficulties and just an array of emotions that may topple us. And then tomorrow we get back onto the cushion and we try again. And every day, what we are doing is to try again. So for those of you who do write poems, who have the practice of poetry, I think it is fantastic and phenomenal. I think it is an amazing way to express the Dharma, to express one's life, to attend to a creative endeavor when we get off the cushion. If you paint, you know, the process is the same thing. You will revise a painting until you are happy with it, until it's okay, and you can let it go. And so it's different, but it's the same kind of process of, again, revising. Oops, I didn't quite make that painting. I like it and it's finished, but maybe I'll try again, right?
Yeah.
And the same with the poem. You know, poets write so many poems because you never say what you wanted to say. You never completely are able to say what it is you truly want to say. And so you finish a poem and you have no other choice but to start again, to try again, to write another poem, paint another picture, plant another garden, start another sculpture, whatever art you have taken up, write another short story, whatever it is, you have to start again, to try again. So very much like our Zen practice. And a beautiful poet, deeply articulate about his own process, about the finer points of that process and the intricacies of his own mind. Deeply expressive. I'm really grateful for that half hour. It was maybe 45 minutes and deeply moving and excellent. So excuse me for taking up all that expression, but I was very much moved by it today, and I wanted to share that with you, especially because I've been slightly pushing the creative process and speaking about how important it is to take up a creative activity in one's life and to work with it and to you know, essentially take you out of yourself, to take us out of ourselves and to allow ourselves to be vulnerable in the midst of a creative activity. Not too late for anyone. If you haven't taken one up, not too late. Doesn't matter how old you are. Grandma Moses was 75 or something like that when she began to paint. And so there's no reason that one cannot engage in a creative activity and find out all that comes, the richness of it for oneself. So, excuse me, and maybe you have something to say that you might share in response.
I enjoy doing haiku.
Good.
And it comes fairly naturally to me to do the 5-7-5, the stanzas. And yet I go back over and over because the beauty of the haiku is that you're trying to put so much into so little to express whatever it is. And I can't do that with larger poetry, but I can do that with haiku. What I love about what you're sharing, Eido-san, about what he said is this expression of our existential nature. I mean, I think poetry is one of the few ways that I know it can be done, because existentialism seems so abstract, and yet we all have a need to understand and express meaning in life. That's what I call spirituality. And I'm grateful that Zazen puts me back to interiorly wrestle with things. It's a wonderful teaching tonight, Eido-san. Thank you.
Thank you. I mean, we also, part of my giving this tonight, or suggesting this tonight, is that Zen practice should be wide. It should be wide, and it should include all of life. So we don't have to engage only in a Dharma book to find practice and the Dharma everywhere. And so that is also what I wanted to say tonight, that if our practice is narrow and going too straight a line, narrow road, it's stultifying. We wind up giving up. We're forced to give up practice because it becomes so tight and small and we can't endure it. It should be really wide. It should be all of life. So we can learn from everything. And should, as Zen students, we should be able to talk about it in that way too, and learning from one another in terms of the breadth of life and all that it includes.
I was reading an account by a Zen teacher who said that when he looked at his students, he could see their individuality when they were all sitting doing zazen. That's when he could see them be most individual, right? It wasn't when they were talking or wearing different clothes, but when they were all dressed the same, they were all sitting, they were all doing the same thing. That's when he could see their individuality. And so that was connecting with me, Eido-san, when you were talking about creativity as sitting zazen, how can you be creative when you're doing something so precise and so the same every day? But there is great creativity in that. So it just kind of struck me.
Well, yeah, and zazen is never the same twice, ever. Because we have already revised ourselves from yesterday. And so we're a new person every day to be on the cushion. And we meet ourselves then as that new person. And so allowing that new person to evolve, to deepen, to be enriched, to live fully, to blossom. That is our work.
I was thinking also, when I'm working on a painting or if I'm writing a poem, I'm working on something specific. And I think that's the same with life, with everything we meet when we get off the cushion, with everything that we do. It's all specific. It's all a particular action, a particular thought, a particular, when I think of life, sometimes I see, I might think of it as a very general term, but the way we meet life is one thing at a time. And it's the way that I do art, and, and it's the way, because I'm dealing with a particular thing or a particular thought, particular color, I can revise it. So it's really so rich to realize that's happening all of the time, whether we're aware of it or not. But how rich when we can become aware of, oh, this is how this works. Oh, and to come up with something that works better in a poem. You go, okay, that's it. Or, a painting. And it's also true that when you said that we write poetry, we keep writing because we never get what we were actually going for. And it's the same in painting. Right. I can never get there. So I do another one.
Right.
And I think maybe in our lives, in all of our actions, I can never get, and we don't think all the time about that, but that's why the revision happens. And it's so creative. It's not like, oh, I did something terrible, so I've got to improve it. It might be that, but it can also be just full of joy. So
in that, one second, Jerry. So in that, there's the not being moved on is an important aspect in that when you are working with that particular piece, that you don't get moved on to something else, but that you stay with it to find out what it's trying to tell you. So just wanted to say that. That's what he was, I think, alluding to when he talks about don't be moved on. Stick with that for its full expression. Sorry, Jerry, go ahead.
Oh, not at all. I wanted to comment on what Krista said, in that if you're all doing the same thing, then you can tell the differences. Suzuki Roshi said that as well. I think it may be in Zen Mind, I'm not sure. But he said that too, and my experience is that also. If everybody is doing the same thing, everyone does it in a slightly different way, and there you can really see the differences among people.
Right.
You can see just from the backs of people.
Right.
Accurately, so that that's an important point.
Yeah, you see that especially in bowing, for instance, all bowing together, and there's no two people can do it the same. It's impossible. Everybody is different, and we all bow differently. So but we're doing the same thing. So, yeah, it's good. Yeah. And Joan, even you in flowers, right? Everybody knows Joan is a flower teacher.
yeah.
Ikebana. And you know that creating a gorgeous arrangement is a process of revision in putting it together. Do you want to say more?
Interesting. You should bring that up, because I spent half my day doing ikebana, and then I photograph it, and I never quite get there. Perfection is a really funny thing, because you never really get there. You get close, but so it's and the camera sees different things than the eye does too, which is really frustrating.
Yeah.
But
well, I don't know if ikebana has the same kind of idiom in it. Say, if you are making a pot, if you are making a teapot out of clay, it's got to be a little cattywampus. Otherwise, it's too perfect. And in Zen art, it has to be a little tiny bit, a little off. And I don't know if ikebana has the same kind of, I think there's some wabi-sabi kinds of ikebana in which it's a little natural.
well, yeah, I suppose there's that element. Everything's asymmetrical, and yet it's not just that either. There's a kind of place where you know that it works, but trying to describe or define what that is is really difficult to say when something works and something doesn't work.
Right. Yeah. And that's mostly the question in art of any kind. Does it work or not? Does it succeed? Not whether it follows some rule or form of color or anything else. Does it work? Does it succeed as an artwork? Yeah. Which is why we can see some incredibly crazy paintings, and they work. They just somehow, they work.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah. And it's very difficult to enter the painting of a painting and think I'm going to paint something really off base. I mean, you can't do that either. So, it's such a challenge, incredible challenge. Yeah.
Yeah, a lot of times non-Japanese students will want to go right for free form without learning the traditional styles. And you can always tell when somebody's just trying to go for free form, it's just never quite comes off because they don't have the training to make it happen.
Right. It's the same thing in painting and the same thing in poetry. Same thing in painting. If you don't study the forms, you cannot go to abstract, or it just shows that you bypass the training. Mm-hmm. And I think it is the same in poetry, that, when I was teaching poetry, the students just didn't want to read any other poems because they didn't want to be influenced, because they wanted just to write their own poems. And then they didn't want to receive any critique on their poems either, because they wrote it and therefore it was so pure and wonderful and perfect because they did it. I say, okay, well, go ahead. And it was like a teacher that I had at San Jose State. When it was time for grades, he would just say, I only give A's, and this was in graduate school. He said, I only give A's and B's because there's no point in failing anybody, because life will fail you. I don't have to give out a failing mark. If that's where you are, life will fail you. So it behooves us to train And this is what this fellow says, this Professor Davis, his training is prominent in his writing. It's so obvious how well he's been trained in language and the beauty of line and so forth. Beautiful poems. So, so even if we are thinking that we will take up some kind of art, we could take a class in it first to just get a little idea about, what the principles are in that particular art. What are they? I know that, in forming a garden, I can stick things in the ground and I've got a green thumb and they will grow. But I am not a landscape architect and I do not know the principles of landscape work. So, so we ought to honor and understand what we know and what we don't know and be willing to train if that's something we want to pursue. In the case of Professor Davis, he was already graduated from high school when he started writing poetry. And somebody challenged him. He said, why don't you try to write a poem? And he did. I mean, he tried and it just caught on with him as something that was an expression that felt right for him. So he wound up, following that, pursuing that. So sometimes life just jumps in our way then and shows us something that maybe we can follow. So, all right, my friends.
Oh.
Yep.
Did you hear the O?
I did.
Notice the time, Eido-san, I'm sorry, but I just wanted to say a little dovetail on what Joan was sharing. The Western eyes going to Japan, my own, I tried Ikebana and it was an embarrassment because, you just throw flowers in a vase, right? As a Westerner. Or when I tried tea ceremony, same thing. And I think, if I recall, please correct me, I think it takes 10 years with Ikebana to at least become a good beginner, something of that nuance of the importance of form, right? So that's, I think, an important lesson also is no matter what you want to endeavor in, learning the right form, then you can become more individual in your expression, right? So anyway.
Yeah. And it takes a lifetime to be able to actually taste a cup of tea.
Mhm.
Beautiful.
Yeah. So, all right, my friends, anything else? Yeah, we just start rambling and so forth. So anyway, thank you very much. Deep appreciation. All right, thank you very much, everybody. Please take care of yourselves out there and everywhere and every day. Take good care of yourselves. I'm looking forward to seeing you again soon.